Welcome back to my channel for a short Leica episode. And the background of this video is the following. Just recently, I got my new Leica SL3 Reporter. And I also made a video about this new Leica SL3 Special Edition. And I will post a link down below in the info box so you can look this up. And of course, I had to set up the camera from scratch. And I did not use any user profiles stored on SD card. And over the years, I posted many tutorials on Leica cameras, how to customize them, how to use them, how to understand the menus, how to create a meaningful workflow. And I used the opportunity with this new Leica SL3 Reporter to rethink my setup, to rethink the concept I've propagated so far. And I actually came up with something different. And the customization I want to show you in this video concerns the function buttons, but also if we switch on the camera in a moment, the control screen, the status screen in the menu, where you can also customize the soft buttons here appearing on the LCD screen. And in this video, I want to share with you my new setup. I think this is superior to what I did in the past, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. For you, it's for free. For me, it means the world and helps me to increase the reach of my channel. Many thanks for that. All right, before showing you my customization and the way how I now newly set up my Leica SL3 Reporter, let's quickly address the question, are there any principles we should follow when customizing a camera? Sounds almost scientific, right? And I think there are. And I can come up with a couple of principles which I find very important. And of course, this is a free world, a free country. Please come up with your own principles. But let me share mine. And the first one is a principle which is very common among big consulting firms. I think McKinsey was the first one who came up with that. Forget for the moment any negative associations you might have with large consulting companies. And their principle is called an acronym MECE, M-E-C-E. And it stands for mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive. What does it mean? Well, it means make sure everything you need is covered in a complete way. And that's the completely exhaustive part of the acronym MECE. And the second is make sure you don't create any overlaps, which is the mutually exclusive part of that MECE principle. And it basically means when we translate this into my context here, how to customize a camera, we should make sure that every control element which I can customize here has a dedicated function so that in total I get full coverage of everything I need for a smooth shooting workflow, and I don't create any overlaps, and I don't waste a customizable mechanical control element on the camera for something which is already enforced and placed somewhere else. I think that is important. And I think there is a second principle which I also find meaningful, namely that if you take the camera out of box, there are already pre-populated assigned functions to mechanical control elements on the camera, namely from the manufacturer side. And we all hope that they carefully thought this through. So not everything they did when you take the camera out of box needs to get an override into some different associated function. And there is one good example here on the Leica SL3, which I'm going to cover in the course of the video. So I think these are the principles we should adhere to. We should make sure we get complete coverage in everything we assign to customizable elements on the camera body for a smooth workflow. We should make sure we avoid overlaps. And third, let's have a look what Leica pre-assigned, and maybe it's not so stupid what they did and we can just accept it and use it and embed it in our own workflow. For the Leica SL3, we have two main categories which we can customize. The first category are the functional elements, the control elements, the mechanical elements on the camera body, like customizable buttons, control wheels here and here, here. And we, by the way, have also customizable buttons here on the front side of the camera. And the second category are soft buttons. And that's the first time we see this in Leica cameras, was introduced with the Leica SL3. And if I go here into the control screen, I have a bunch of soft buttons here which I can customize. And one of the questions we need to address is, what is meaningful to sit here as a soft control element, and what is meaningful to sit on a mechanical element on the camera? And my personal belief is, I think it's best to have elements here on the soft buttons in the control screen, which I don't necessarily change during a shooting session. And everything that needs quick access during a shooting session should sit on a mechanical element on the camera body. That is another principle I want to introduce here, and that is something I'm in favor of. I want to have here only functions which I do not change during a shooting session. And what are these things? Well, first of all, we have here exposure mode. So here you see I'm currently in aperture priority mode, but there is shutter priority here. There is fully manual mode and program mode, which is banned. I never use that. That is nothing I use. It's probably a beginner's mode, and I don't want that in a shooting session. And I have here the exposure modes, which I typically do not change during a shooting session. And the same applies to the user profiles here. And you see my user profiles here are still images, people photography with continuous autofocus, of course, and then my tripod settings. And what I use very often is the still image profile. And user profiles I don't change during a shooting session. I either have the camera sitting on a tripod, and then very likely here I'm in fully manual mode. And I can also steer this via my user profiles here, or I have the camera in my hand and hunt down a photo model and try to get nice shots of her face or what have you. And in this way, none of these settings here in the soft button on the control screen is something I changed during a shooting session. The same applies to the shutter type. I have here mechanical, I have here electronic, and here hybrid is something I don't change during a shooting session. Here is the self timer off 2 seconds, 6 seconds, 12 seconds, 30 seconds is something I dial in once, and then the camera is on a tripod and I will no longer change it. Something that happens only once and then it's fixed for the whole shooting session. The same for the image size is something I don't change during a session. And the aspect ratio, this is the full native sensor aspect ratio, 3:2. The picture profiles I hardly change during a shooting session. And then of course here, perspective control. If I go for, let's say, architecture, I might want to switch this on, but then it stays on for a longer series of images. And that's the way I think about this status screen here, this control screen where I have the soft buttons. Everything that's here is something I choose once and then I go and shoot. And I don't change it during that shooting session. Before I go to the customization of the mechanical elements here on the camera body, one more remark. And I just distinguished between settings I need once for a shooting session and settings I will change very likely during a shooting session. And there is a second reasoning and thinking which did flow into my considerations how to customize this camera, and that is the sequence of events, how I decide about certain settings when I go for a shooting. And of course, whether I'm in aperture priority or whether I'm in shutter speed priority is something I decide at the very beginning of the workflow. In the same way, I decide at the beginning, will my camera be on a tripod because I go for long exposures at night, or will I shoot handheld? Do I need very fast shutter speed, so I need to go to electronic or hybrid, or will I be fine with the native range of shutter speeds I get offered under mechanical shutter? So these are all things which I consider at the beginning of the shooting. In the same way, the image size, the aspect ratio, and whether I'm on architecture or not and want to have perspective control switched on or off. These are all things that happen very early in the workflow, and that's why it is also good to have them here on the control screen, because in the heat of the fire during the shooting, I want to work and operate exclusively via mechanical elements on the lens and the camera body. By the way, little side remark, if you're asking yourself what lens I have mounted currently here, that is a LUMIX S lens for the LUMIX system from Panasonic. It's a standard zoom 24 to 105 mm, minimum focusing distance is 0.3 meter. It has a constant aperture of an f4 at all focal lengths. And I want to test this and try this out because it might be a very interesting alternative option for a standard zoom lens compared to the very famous, but also very old 24-90 Vario Elmarit, or the 24-70 or 28-70 Vario Elmarit lenses with a constant aperture of f2.8. And if you're interested to hear my thoughts and to see my experience about this zoom lens from Panasonic mounted on the Leica SL3, let me know, drop me a comment. I'm happy to post a video about this lens. Why is it interesting? Because it's more lightweight than the 24-90, is more compact than the 24-90, but offers substantially more flexibility on focal length because it goes up to a focal length of 105 millimeter. And by the way, is supposed to be, if you look into tests, a really good lens. So why not trying it out? And for this tutorial, it will stay on my camera body. Now let's switch gear and turn our attention to mechanical control elements on the camera. And we have three customizable control wheels here. We have a thumb control wheel or rear control wheel. We have one sitting at the top of the camera body on the right-hand side and one sitting at the left-hand side. And the wheel on the left-hand side is a novum. It was not there on the Leica SL2. That space here was wasted, and I mentioned this repeatedly in my introductory videos when the Leica SL3 was introduced and I was on the Leica campus in Wetzlar, Germany. And here now it makes sense to think about and to consider what Leica embedded from scratch in terms of customizations. And if you take that camera out of box, this wheel here is actually occupied with ISO, and that makes perfectly sense. In the past, I always had an ISO button sitting here on the top side, and when I pushed it, I could, with the control wheel or touch functionality, dial in my ISO and switch between auto ISO and manual ISO. But Leica customized this camera out of box when you freshly purchased it with an ISO control wheel here. And I think that makes more sense than what I did in the past. I think it is really good to have the ISO wheel here and then to have two more control wheels which we can use. And they are in my setup reserved for steering in different shooting modes, the aperture or the shutter speed, or both the aperture and the shutter speed. Because we don't have on most of the Leica SL lenses an aperture ring, so we need to steer it with a control element on the camera body. Let's start with the left-hand side top control wheel here. And for you to better see this, I currently have applied the lens cap to the lens. So we have a dark screen here. And the way Leica set this up from scratch when you take the camera out of box is really smart. Have a look here. I can turn this wheel here, but if I use this wheel here, I can switch between auto ISO and fix ISO. If I'm in fix ISO, I can use this wheel now, watch my ISO setting here, to actually dial in higher ISO or lower ISO values. If I want to get back into auto ISO, I just turn it until I cross ISO 100 and then I can switch back to auto ISO. So this is a very smart way how Leica implemented this from scratch. And if it is smart out of box, why should I change it? So this control wheel now here is permanently occupied with ISO functionality to switch between manual ISO and auto ISO, and in manual ISO to dial in the ISO value I'm looking for. Simple like that. Have a look once more. Here it is. Now I can switch fix ISO, auto ISO. If I'm in fix ISO, I can turn that wheel and here my ISO setting is updating in the lower left-hand side corner. You see that here. If I want to get back into auto ISO, just dial it until you cross that point here. And then you can go back to auto ISO or stay in fix ISO. A very smart solution. And the way to see how this is implemented in the menu, we just go into customize control. Let me show you. And I think this is here, customize control. And then we have the dials. And in the dials, we basically can here choose between autofocus setup and manual focus setup. And if I'm restricting myself to autofocus for the time being here, I can switch in different exposure modes. I'm currently in aperture priority mode. And then you see I have the thumb wheel for the aperture. I have the top wheel for the aperture in the same way because the only parameter I need to steer is actually the aperture, and the rest of the parameters except ISO is figured out by the camera. And I don't want to get confused which one on the right-hand side I'm using here, so I just assigned the aperture to both wheels here. And the left dial here on top is the ISO. And that's the way it is assigned. That's the way you see it. And this works now in a very convenient way for all the other modes. An exception is, of course, manual mode. If you go into manual mode, then I have here on the thumb wheel the aperture. On the top right-hand side dial, I have the shutter speed, but the left top side dial is always the ISO. Simple like that. And there is consistency required. If you want to create a smooth workflow, you need to stay consistent. If in one shooting mode, the ISO dial is sitting here, why should you assign it in a different shooting mode to the other side? Keep it here. Keep it here for all exposure modes, even for shutter speed priority here, for instance, or program mode, which I never use, but let's go to shutter priority. You see now I have both wheels here associated with shutter speed. Before under aperture priority, I had both wheels here with the choice of the aperture, but the left-hand side dial is always ISO. And that creates consistency and helps you to stay consistent in your workflow and to train your brain to create muscle memory, where a certain function you need maybe to change quickly in a workflow is sitting on the camera body. With this, I also covered already the right-hand side wheels, the top wheel and the thumb wheel or the rear control wheel. And the consistency is clear. In aperture priority, both wheels here steer the aperture. In shutter speed priority, both wheels here steer the shutter speed. And in fully manual mode, I have the aperture here and the shutter speed sitting on top of the camera body. Very simple. And that is consistency and is something I can recognize very easily. Of course, I could say here, the thumb wheel is aperture and the right dial here on top then is something like exposure compensation. Or I could say is ISO, but that would be an overlap. That's not in line with the MISI principle we talked about at the very beginning. You remember, mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive. If I would go here for ISO and say, oh, it's enough to have aperture on one wheel and associate ISO with the top wheel, then I have overlap, a double functionality. I have a dedicated ISO wheel here, I have one here, so I don't need it. And I'd rather waste the opportunity to put another function on that top dial in order to prevent getting confused and then in a shooting situation where the timing maybe counts to scratch my head, oh, was I steering the aperture with the thumb wheel or was I steering it with the top control wheel? In this way, it's always clear. No matter what wheel on the right-hand side I'm turning, it will change the aperture for me, and that's what I want. There's one more function here associated with control wheels, and that's the push on the thumb wheel here. And I have, if I push and hold for a moment, you see there is a bunch of functions I can choose here. I can scroll through that list, but I want to have the magnification here because that is super convenient for me. If I'm shooting and I want to quickly check focus, I just push it and get my magnified representation of Jennifer here in the live view. And if I just push it again, it goes back into the full frame representation. And that's exactly how I want it here. All right, so far so good. Let's talk about the FN button and about this button here. And both are fully customizable. You see this when you press and hold. You get the list of options I've activated in the menu, and the same here, press and hold. And I can go through these different functions and assign them to the respective button. And when you take the camera fresh out of box, if I'm not mistaken, the FN button is used to toggle between display representations and overlays. And overlays address these info bars here at the top and the bottom. And whether you want to have a grid or a histogram and what have you. And that is the original meaning of the FN button. I use the FN button to center back my focus field. Have a look here. It's somewhere here, bring it in a dark area. And if I want to center it back, I push the FN button. And if I press and hold, you see here it says toggle focus point, which is the function you just experienced live. And the toggling through overlays and display representations, I assigned to this button here. And this is a button which out of box is toggling between LCD only, electronic viewfinder only, or auto, which means the camera recognizes by a sensor whether you approach with your eye the EVF and then switches into EVF and the LCD off. And I want to have this here because it's very convenient. If you hold your camera in this way and you want to have a grid, I just push it here and the grid is there. Or you want to have a level gauge, it's here. Or you want to have an empty screen with no overlays for avoiding any distractions, it's here. And here I'm back in my most favorite overlay situation on the live view. And that's why I have it here. I just jump with my thumb over the joystick and activate it here. And I can, of course, customize in the menu what display representations I have here. You see, I have here only 4. and you can customize this. I've shown this in tutorials on my channel. It's not the topic of this video, but this is for me the most convenient button to actually do this toggling between different overlays and display representations. And the FN button, as I said, centers back the focus field. Now, this function, centering back the focus field, is something I wished I could assign to the joystick, but the joystick doesn't have this function. And if I press and hold the joystick, I don't get a menu popping up where I can choose different options, like if I press and hold the FN button. Then I get all these options here. I don't get them with the joystick. The joystick has a dedicated menu entry under Customize Control. And if we go here to the joystick, there is unfortunately nothing which says toggle focus point. So I cannot use it for the function I want. I can here decide, and I have auto exposure lock here. See, if I click, it says auto exposure lock here. So my exposure is locked. If I click it again, it releases the exposure. And you can also customize this for press and hold. I'll show you quickly. If we go here to the joystick and go to operating mode, currently it's in click. You saw it, click means click. It's activated as long as I don't press the joystick again, and then it's going away. And if I go here on hold, then auto exposure lock will be locked as long as I press and hold the joystick. Watch here, holding it, you see the AEL here, releasing it, it's gone. And I prefer the click because this is easier if I want to recompose after metering exposure. And so I want to get it back as quickly as possible. Let's go here. Let's go to click. But generally, I don't have the flexibility on a joystick push that I have on press and hold some of these customizable buttons. That's why toggling back the autofocus field to the center sits on FN. Display representations sit on this button. I don't need quick access to whether I see the live view through the EVF or the LCD or whether I have the auto mode, because that is something I decide at the beginning and then it stays that way. And I have this camera all the time on auto, so why wasting this button for a function which I don't really need during a shooting, which I actually never need, because at the setup, at the initial setup of the camera, this is set on auto and then it stays there forever. I'm almost done with the presentation of my customization. We have 4 more control elements remaining, 2 customizable buttons here at the top side, a right button, a left button, and 2 on the front side, a lower button and an upper button. And that is something I want to quickly show now. And all the functions, in the spirit of what I said at the beginning of the video, all the functions I assigned to these 4 customizable function buttons concern functions which I might change during a shooting and which are not fixed in the same way as functions I assigned here to these soft buttons in the control screen. And they concern drive mode, focus mode, and so on. So let's start with the top button here. If I press it once, this is my button where I steer the drive mode from single to burst mode, and then at the very end to intervalometer and to exposure bracketing. And that is a function I might change during a shooting, so it gets a dedicated button sitting here. The one on the left-hand side of this button here is my focus mode, autofocus single, continuous, intelligent autofocus I never use. But here I can quickly change between autofocus single and autofocus continuous, for instance, for people shooting or for moving subjects. And that is something I use frequently also during a shooting session. And that's why it gets also a dedicated button. Last but not least, the 2 buttons here on the front side of the camera, I've also customized with functions which I might change during a shooting. And I start with the lower button, showing you that one first. That is the autofocus mode. So I can switch here, you know, from multi-field to spot to field, zone, tracking, eye phase body detection, and the very famous beta version of animal detection. And that makes perfectly sense to me and is something I might change during a shooting. And then the upper button here on the front side is actually my metering, which is something I change frequently during a shooting. So highlight weighted, multi-field, and you see how the live view is updating, center weighted, and spot. And that concludes my little journey. So that's the way I now rethought my customization of Leica SL3 cameras. And I thought I should share it with you, because maybe that's also giving you some food for thought, how you want to customize your camera. And for me, that perfectly works. By the way, I love shooting the Leica SL3 Reporter. And as indicated, if you want me to get back on the Panasonic lens, the 24-105, drop me a comment and I'm happy to provide a fully fledged review of that lens. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.